There we go. Welcome back to PAFOW Live. Stacey Harris, Managing Director of Sapient Insights, is my guest today. Stacey, how are you?
I'm doing well. It's busy season for us, right? As you know, we're
Yeah,
mid-survey season for our
yeah.
annual HR system survey. So we'll be closing here in another week and a half. But and at the same time, it's summer. Everybody's taking vacation, right? So we're prepping and getting ready for the fall, and I think it's nice to get a little bit of break for everyone right now. So doing really well. And how about you, Al? I mean, you've been busy as well. So hopefully you're getting a little break this summer too.
I took my break pretty much last week, so now I have to get some work done, and I'll take another break there in late August. But yeah, there's so much going on. Obviously, HR tech at the end of September, and the space is hot. HR technology is hot. People analytics is hot, and obviously we have a lot to talk about on those themes. But before we jump into that, 25th year of this survey, is that right, Stacey?
Close to it. That'll
Yeah.
be next year. So
That'd
we're
be
in
nice.
our 24th year. So this is the
Oh,
24 years of capturing survey data. And it'll be our 24th annual white paper in the fall of this year that will be launching our big sort of launch to the market, right? Like we do every year at the annual HR Tech conference this year in Las Vegas. Cross everyone's fingers. We're
yeah.
all healthy. We're all doing well. We're able to do a little bit of in person at that event because that'll be a really good opportunity to delve into the data. Now, what I think for myself personally, I've been doing this. I was just telling someone the other day, 7 years. I'm
Yeah.
now starting to be like, boy, this is, you know, it's always been a labor of love. And, Lexi Martin, who ran it before me, and all of anybody who's in analytics knows Lexi and her amazing background and history. I remember when she handed over to me and she said, "You'll fall in love with this." And she was right. I did. It's not just the data, it's also the people in the community and everyone who participates. It's really is a something that I enjoy doing, which is wonderful to say about your job, right?
Oh, absolutely it is. And those who are, to your point, long tenured in HR technology or analytics is very familiar with the
Yeah.
survey. That being said, for those who aren't, particularly practitioners, can you share what it's about and who is the ideal respondent for this survey?
So it's evolved over the years, but it's always been centrally focused on understanding the HR technology adoption and usage inside of enterprise organizations. And so we really have from 1997, the first year it was launched, till today. I've always asked organizations about what applications are you using to manage your workforce at any level. We then have added over the years things like, what service delivery models do you have around that? What approach have you taken to your processes to fit into that? We also ask questions about the integration platforms and the tools you use from the analytics perspective, as that became not more than just a tool, it now became an application area. What's interesting, I think, a little bit different about our research is that we are really looking for not just the details on what you're using, but how well it's working for you. So we have a user experience and vendor satisfaction we call voice of the customer section of the survey. And we really want anyone who is selecting, implementing, and using the technology at a high level, so those SMEs, to have the ability to have a voice in this industry and say something. So we have always said that the HR technologist, the analytics professional, the people analytics professional who is using this technology is the best person to respond to the survey.
Mm-hmm.
This year, one of the things we did that we're really excited about is we have created an upfront personalization process for the survey. So like everything else in the world, we're tailoring and personalizing.
Yeah.
We basically give you an option to say, which sections do you want to take? So if you're more into analytics, you can focus on the analytics section. If you're more into recruiting or learning, you can focus on that section. If you think you know enough about all of that in your environment, you can take it all. And so that's been good. I think it's given us an opportunity to reach some more audiences too.
Oh, that's actually brilliant because obviously, given the expansion of the space and the number of technologies that, for one person to be an expert on all of them is a big ask.
It is,
And
yeah.
so, can you speak to that a little bit? Because I recall, given certain sizes of organizations, there's X number of HR applications in a certain organization. Can you give an idea of how many, relatively speaking, are in play now relative to, say, 5, 10 years ago?
It's interesting. When Lexi first started, I think we were tracking, or at least when I first took over, I should say about 8 years ago, that would have been, we were tracking like 30, maybe 28 different applications we considered core. And the way our survey works is there's a ton of little applications that people are using. Like I said, tools, and they'll buy something for a department or function. We're looking at those applications that are enterprise wide, because that's when they start to have an impact on the entire organization. And so, fundamentally, there were like 20 or so really big enterprise-wide applications that people were using for their organizations. That jumped to about 36, 37 about 4 years ago. We saw a massive sort of upswing as people started adding talent, time, and sort of those service delivery tools as well. Mm-hmm. We are now up to tracking 56 different individual applications that people are using at an enterprise level today. So that has almost doubled since I took over. And it's fascinating to watch, because originally, would you have thought a surveying tool was an enterprise platform? It might have been a tool that you were using for learning. It might have been a tool you were using once a year for engagement, but it wouldn't be something you were really using at an enterprise level, that you had to have integrations, that you had to have connections to. Today, it's an enterprise platform, right? It's a big part of your analytics conversation. It's a big part of your enterprise. So that's how we think about enterprise applications, and it's massive. On average, what we're finding across all of our data sets, organizations are managing major contracts for 11 to 12 different major applications. Now, there will be a lot of smaller ones in there, but 11 to 12 is sort of the number that we hear right now. So whether you're a small organization or a large organization, obviously that number goes up if you're large and down if you're small. But it's fascinating to me to see how many contracts and negotiations and year over year sort of reviews people have to do to just manage their HR ecosystem right now.
Yeah, and that's the word that came to mind. It is a true ecosystem now. And correct me if I'm wrong, and this is certainly based on my perspective and experience, is that very few have been able to consciously manage that ecosystem across the employee lifecycle in a very concerted, thoughtful manner. In some cases, that's compromised the employee experience, and those who are able to do it well can actually enhance the employee experience, arguably, by not overwhelming, by being creating focused insights to move the needle on certain key issues like diversity, equity, inclusion, or opportunities, rather, improving engagement, productivity, all these things. So, what's your thought about being an educated buyer, an educated manager of this ecosystem? I sense that's the purpose of your research, right?
It is, exactly. It's funny. I have several people who have done it year over year for many, many years. Jim Pettit, who runs HRIS for Wayne Farms, he's been in the market. A lot of people know him through IRM and everything else. Me and him had a lot of conversations. He's one of our longest time participants of the survey. And he says, every year I learn something new. Every year I learn something I should be asking different, right? Every year I understand my ecosystem a little bit better because of the questions that you ask. And that is exactly, I think, because as you said, it changes. There's no one person who can keep up on all of it. Even I, as an industry analyst, and that's all I do is try and keep up on the systems and the vendors, and it's really hard for me to keep track of it. I think the other side of that is that there's oftentimes this, and I think we're starting to understand it in the market, but I think particularly inside of businesses, there's a desire to stop change, to say, well, if I just stop changing for a little bit, I could catch up and get my arms around it, right? You hear that all the time. Like, if they would just stop, we were implementing this, and then when we're done, we're going to be done. And I think that's the one thing our data has definitely proven out, is that there's no end date. There's no perfect state. I use the term calibration, which it's a big term in analytics, right? But you really do have to recalibrate almost every year, 2 years, to say, is it still doing what we thought it would? Did our needs change? Did our integrations really work the way we thought we would? The idea of rollout and done, I think, is the biggest thing people have to sort of realize, that in this role, you just have to assume you're always going to be making edits and changes.
Yeah, and that can be very daunting if you have this legacy perspective, like, oh, damn, I thought we were done. However, it can also, correct me if I'm wrong from your perspective, be very empowering. It's like we're always improving. We're always looking for a source of competitive advantage and serving the employee base in a different way to not only drive desired business outcomes, but to help them have a better work experience, better well-being, better engagement, and all these things. So my pointed question here is that when we think about employee experience and employee well-being, which has become top of mind, given the pandemic, and it had gotten some lip service over the years, but certainly with the pandemic, it's now front and center. And my personal hope is that it will remain front and center. So we've had people analytics, HR, facilities, IT, all these formerly disparate groups get together and explore what hybrid work looks like, explore what digital transformation looks like, and workforce planning and all this stuff. So formerly, and again, this is my perspective, HR technologies were selected to either stand up or improve a certain process. And now they have not only that ability or that need, but it's affecting a larger ecosystem. There's tentacles that it affects. And so my pointed question here is that, do you see a shift in who is actually making these buying decisions? Is it still these functional silos, or is it a broader governance group that's actually looking at this broader ecosystem?
It's a great question. And I think there's sort of spectrums, right, on this one, because we talk to a lot of organizations where it is still a very functional decision-making process, right? We need a recruiting tool, or we need an HRS tool, and we're not thinking about time, or we're not thinking about talent in that conversation. But then I think I can't tell you the last large global organization I've talked to who doesn't have a very large governance body who's making these decisions. And the way we talk about it is you will make the right decision about who needs to be included in your selection process if you start with a conversation about strategy, culture, and data. If you start with a conversation about process and efficiency, you're going to end up with the wrong people in that selection process, because strategy, culture, and data will bring you to the understanding that this system is meant to achieve something for you. And so you have to understand what's the strategy that you're starting with as a business. That's, we all say, well, we want to start, but honestly, I mean, are you trying to move something by 20%, change market? You have to know that as part of your conversation. Your culture is really important, because we're in a commodity-based business in HR technology today. About 80% of any system you see, someone else also does that same 80% of it, right? Like that's from core HRMS down to your talent systems. Even analytics platforms now are starting to become similar enough that it's that 20% that is really unique to you and your culture that is going to make or break the success of that system. And it's not just the technology, it's the services that's provided by the vendor, right? And those things go hand in hand. And then I know this, and I'm not saying this just because of who your audience is. I mean, the data seems like, oh yeah, she's kind of pandering to us. But this is an actual image I have in my report, in my book. It's the center of the box. If you don't know what data you're going to use or what information you're going to need to get out of that system, you won't have a good vendors will tell you our reports are great. You can get the data you need. You'll always be able to get the data you need. Me and we've been in these systems. You may not be able to get a total employee number if you haven't configured appropriately what a total employee is, right?
Yeah, 100%.
So you have to know what the data is that you're trying to achieve, and what that governance for it will look like. If you start there, you'll get the right people in the conversation. If you start where you were talking about, you end up with a very siloed system. Yeah.
Yeah, I've always liked and respect you, Stacey. I didn't think it'd get any higher. I mean that sincerely, because that is a mindset and approach that I think is under appreciated. Because I, having been in a role, would see an HR or business strategy, HR strategy, and then ask downstream, well, how are we going to measure it? And I'm like, wait a minute. That I would have loved to have been in that conversation a lot earlier, because if you have the strategy, culture, and data in mind, that will help you inform the appropriate technologies. Mm-hmm. That will help you inform the experience that you want to create, and vice versa. It'll shed light on the boundaries and limits of what can and can be done. So I certainly celebrate it. I look forward to the image. I look forward to the book. I look forward to the whole, yes, narrative around it. So this actually inspires me to ask this question, and because I've seen you, and I know Lexi was getting into this, and obviously she's gone on to a focused people analytics vendor with Vizier. But the detailed and nuances of how you look at HR analytics or people analytics has evolved certainly over the last 8 years. Can you speak to how you look at it and some of the questions that you ask?
Yeah, so we, this, and it's always it's a bit of a trickier conversation for analytics than any other HR application, because oftentimes the analytics platform is the one thing that might or might not be shared across multiple functionalities and areas, right?
Right.
And so unlike an HRIS system where that environment sort of has the things it needs to accomplish that are more features and functionalities and processes that you're focusing on, and you'll be figuring out how data goes in and out of it. In this environment, yes, you got to figure out how the data goes in and out of it, but you also might be sharing a data set or a database or an environment with finance or with marketing or with sales. And so what we're finding, we try and sort of ask it in layers, almost like an onion that we're peeling back. We're like, okay, where does it sit? Are you buying the analytics package that's tied to your HR applications, or are you buying an analytics package that is enterprise-wide and across the entire organization? And then how they answer that decides, okay, what are you using that analytics package for? We do ask about what outcomes organizations are achieving. And then we try and get into, how effective those tools are for what you're trying to achieve. And when we sort of peel it that way, I think we get a better answer, because I think when you just ask, are you using analytics? The answer for everyone is almost yes. But in our data set, what we know is there's only about 40% of the market who's using analytics specifically in their HR environment to achieve HR outcomes. That's right. And I think that's a difference from, we use Google Analytics. We know what we're doing in marketing, and we can kind of use that, or we've got a dashboard from our HRIS. Well, does the dashboard help you achieve something, right? Does it actually change something in your organization? So that's the way we've approached it. And it's after a lot of conversations, I went to your guys' events, I go to other events, and I ask people, what are the things that you struggle with, and the things they tell me is that, I'll have a tool, but I people don't know how to actually make it actionable. Right. And it's interesting, I asked my analyst to sort of pull some data just for this conversation. And we were sort of looking at what's the differences between an organization who purchases, their analytics platform from the core HRMS versus talent management versus workforce management. And we also asked, do you pay extra for it, right? And we found in your HRMS, you're less likely to pay extra. But if you're buying an analytics package that's with your talent management or your workforce management system, you're more likely to pay extra. And so I'm thinking, those are the kind of questions where if I have to pay extra, do I then use it more, or do I use it less? Or am I more likely to try and buy something else that'll go across my enterprise if I have to pay more? Those are the kind of questions we get into. So,
those are fantastic questions, because walking the floor of HR Tech and other events, it's been the case that every vendor, and when I say every vendor, I'm talking about 98%,
Yeah.
will have analytics on their booth, in some form. Say everyone's doing analytics. Then it invites the question, what the heck is that? And what data is it? Exclusively their data? Are they curating data? Are they pulling data from other sources? So do you see a multitude of analytic solutions in organizations? And do you have any advice or suggestions on, is it advantageous from your perspective to focus on one or two, or what are your thoughts there?
You could probably answer that particular question about if it's more advantageous better than I, because I'll be honest, our data says on average most organizations have around 2 to 3 different analytics applications they're using.
Okay.
And what we have found is that it's a mix of I bought whatever my enterprise HR platform might offer, right? Whatever that primary tool is for me, 1 or 2 of those.
Mm-hmm.
I am using some sort of visualization tool like a Tableau. I'm using some sort of a database tool like I'm using ASW's or Amazon Web Services, sort of Redshift or something, so that I can pull data and categorize it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're seeing that kind of a makeup generally in large organizations who have a lot of data from different places that they're trying to sort of pull together to do decision making around people. And usually the goal of that is to try to get to some level of workforce planning. Now, most of them aren't doing it yet, but that's the goal. For the 50% below that kind of large organization that's doing that kind of complex environment, they're much more likely to have 1 or 2 platforms, but they're still pulling their data into something else. Mm-hmm. 90% of small organizations or mid-market organizations are just pulling it into Excel, which mm-hmm. is scary, and we all know how dangerous that is.
Perfectly secure.
Exactly. That's why we have laptops that disappear, and everyone's like, "Oh gosh!"
Yeah.
Right? That's where the multitude of organizations are still crunching and cleaning and visualizing, right, their data to some extent. And so I think it's a hard question to ask, and I don't think our data is showing that any one sort of configuration of that is worse or better on the outcomes. What we do see is that organizations who utilize the technology or who are doing enterprise workforce planning because they've rolled it up enough to do that, they end up happier with their technology. They have better user experience and better vendor satisfaction than those who aren't doing enterprise workforce planning. So that shows me that if I can get out of that tool what I need, no matter what that configuration is, I'm more satisfied with it than those who are not doing enterprise workforce planning. So that's as close as we can get to satisfaction ratings or outcomes for whether or not using the tools actually make a difference, right?
Well, I mean, this is fascinating because there's a lot of ways I'd like to take the conversation. I have to choose one. Because, and I'll just share, one is around governance, not only data governance, but just being aware of all the systems and their capabilities and having the fortitude and awareness to say no. Say, well, we're not going to do that. We're not going to have a certain population have the ability to do those analytics for, whatever reason. And, obviously, if there's a value proposition to them doing it, great. My question that I do want to ask, and I'd be interested to know if you do get at this in your survey and research, is the distinction between reporting, dashboarding, scorecarding, and analytics. Is there a distinction between the two that you make, or is it kind of overlap? I know it's a tricky question. Yeah. I just know that some organizations want to do analytics, but they're pretty much doing reporting, and vice versa. Yeah. Hey, I'm doing reporting, but we're calling it, analytics. Is there a distinction that you make?
Sort of. We probably don't make it as clearly as PAFOW does, right? And I get that there are what we call purists in the market. I did a lot of interviews when I was doing a workforce planning research effort, and it was sort of interesting to hear, well, if you're using Excel, are you doing any analytics really, right?
Yeah.
To the like, I mean, it's got formulas, right? It's got
Yeah, I would contend
you could
yeah.
run you can run a correlation in Excel if you really know what you're doing, right?
Yep.
But I think what we're seeing in our data, and I was actually just going because Kim actually just pulled this for me to see if I could get the actual percentage, and I think it's something like 60% or 70% of the organizations are really just doing dashboards and reporting. We kind of ask, what are you achieving, right? And that's the primary thing that they're doing. If they're doing true analytics, which in our mind would be you're combining it to get something else, right? Which means you're taking that data, you're taking that insight, you're combining it, you're creating an analysis, which is either predictive, or you're doing an algorithm that will show trends, or that you're showing, an analysis of, correlations. That to me would be an analytics level, right?
Yep.
We're only seeing about 20 to 30% of organizations who are at that level, right? And remember, we are not just looking at the big guys, and we're not just looking at small guys. We look across. So that's why, I think people would love to say, yeah, we're all doing analytics because our HRIS is doing analytics. Well, just because your HRIS might give you for example, a flight risk, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they might do that automatically. If you don't understand how that was calculated, you don't understand what data goes into that or how it's leveraged, and you're not facilitating whether or not it goes up or down in any fashion. In other words, you're not actually taking action, not just to say, well, if they're flight risk, our managers should do something with that, tell them that they should do something with that. But if you as a analytics person isn't saying, okay, how do I help the company move this, not just roll it downhill to the manager and say, go do what you need to do, then you're not doing analytics. You're just basically taking another piece of data and putting it into a report and saying, go ahead, manager, figure out what you need to do with this.
Right.
Right.
Well, amen to all that. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, I mean, that 20% that you mentioned doing it, yeah, I sense that it is growing. Like there's, next year might be 25%, 30, because I just see an acceleration in the space based on the size of the groups, the number of people and resources going into building capabilities at the enterprise level. So, that's all good. Is that,
and I agree with that.
Data, is that, yeah?
Yeah, it's definitely growing. I think we were at like 16% or something like that, 2 years ago in that number, who were actually doing what you would consider that, analytics at that form. Now we've got 17 to 18% saying they're doing predictive already, right? We have 36% of the market who said they were doing enterprise workforce planning. Now you can do workforce planning at some level if you're just doing headcount numbers without doing a lot of analytics. Right. So what they're considering workforce planning is always a conversation. But those 38% are at least leveraging that data to think about the future, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even if they're not running, long-term, analysis on extrapolations out of who their data set, who their employees might be, or where they might get them from.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, so I think, this is an area where there's lots of shades of gray, and those shades of gray are okay to be in there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the shades of gray are not going away. I just think it's a challenge of not only people analytics professionals, but HR, IT, and HR practitioners in general, just to be aware of these distinctions and gray areas. I often say the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names. It's a Chinese proverb, and really understanding the value proposition, the underlying work that needs to be done, which actually leads into my next question. Burning Glass just purchased MZ, as you know.
Yes, and big move in the market.
A big move in the market. And, call it talent market analytics or labor market analytics, what have you. I cite that as an example because if I am doing workforce planning in an organization, I want a tool like that. And I effectively am not going to do that work, that data aggregation and analytics internally. That's not my core competency. It's a heavy lift, and that's great. So effectively, to use a a nuanced language here. It's like outsourcing some of my analytics capability to a firm, and now I'm consuming the insights and in turn taking action on it. So in that case, I am now, again, an educated consumer, and I need to be an educated shopper, because the mindset going back 10 plus years ago was, I'm going to buy a tool and I'm going to hire somebody to run that tool, and I'm going to drive it, and everything's going to be in-house. But now there's these tools and systems that are outside, if you will, there are firewalls and so forth, and we're consuming that data. What are your thoughts there? Do you see that being a trend? Is that kind of a one-off here and there? I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think this particular merger and acquisition is the start of what we'll see in a lot of other places. So mm-hmm. If you've got 49%, I think we'll see this year if then, but we were at like 40, 48, 49% of organizations who were leveraging some form of benchmarking data in their HR decision making. Now, how they used it and what they did with it, and right is always an interesting question. And the bulk of that is what we consider compensation-based data, right? Not skills data like an MC's was.
Right.
But I can't tell you, when I did my workforce planning analysis, there was not a single company I talked to who did not have MCs as one of the many kind of tools that they had purchased, right?
Right.
So we know that is a big part of those organizations who are in that space and doing that kind of work, and they are purchasing it. My biggest challenge with all of this is that, as great as those tools are, and as much thinking about all the things they do, the problem we have with any analytics or any kind of artificial intelligence inside of our everyday lives and systems is the same problem that we have with those tools, which is that we have a population who's been taught that technology gives you a single right or wrong answer, because that's what we built into most technologies in the past. I put data in and it adds it faster, it slices it faster, it makes sure that there's no errors in the spelling or whatever else I need. But I told it what to do, so the answer it gets is the correct answer, the mm-hmm. answer I think that is right. A human being said this was a correct answer somewhere, right?
Yep.
And so when I look at something that comes across the screen, whether that's Google or anything else, I assume that answer is a yes or no right answer, black and white, right?
Mm-hmm.
What in reality is happening in the market and with all of these technologies is they give us probabilities.
Yep.
And a probability isn't a yes or no answer. A probability is it's 20%, it's 50%, it's 80%, or 90% likely, which means there's 30% of whatever you're analyzing that will not do what it says it will do. Mm-hmm. Now, that may be okay if I'm making a decision about taking a training course. That's not okay if I'm making a decision about flight risk. Mm-hmm. It's not okay if I'm making a decision about whether a car will stop or not, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
I try and put it into these ranges so people understand that, every piece of data you get from a tool that does an algorithm or analysis, you have to think about what's the risk of that answer, and how do you actually start to read probabilities? We don't teach it's part of critical thinking, and we don't teach anybody in communities or in businesses or in our educations to have and think about probabilities and what that means, and it's critical thinking. So that's a very long answer to your question.
No, and it's a very appropriate answer. I'm smiling because I do.
Yes.
Probabilistic decision making is the essence. I mean, to your point, levels of confidence. It's not the case where if situation A exists and intervention B happens, that C is going to result. It doesn't work that way. If A exists and we do B, then C might result to a certain level of confidence, and
exactly.
And being comfortable with that ambiguity is absolutely necessary in the open systems that we're dealing with. The good news is we have so many more technologies and so much more data that's generating information that we can in turn analyze, and we can understand the employee experience, the inflection points. However, it takes a conscious effort to actually make this happen. So some of the things that we've talked about, if I'm listening, I'm like, great, great, great. However, it doesn't come for free. You have to purchase an appropriate tool. You have to have an appropriate individual or team running that tool. And many have said, well, I have 50 systems already. Why do I need one more to do, analytics? What do you say to those, companies? Does the research pop anything that says, hey, if you're really going to get strategic value out of your HR systems, your HR IT ecosystem, then an analytics tool is necessary? Again, I don't want to come across as being self-serving, but I'm just really curious about that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I asked Kimberly to sort of look at a couple of different factors for our call today, and what we found, like I said, is that those organizations who are doing enterprise workforce planning, right, are much more likely to have that higher user experience score and higher vendor satisfaction score, like significantly higher than those who aren't. Mm-hmm. So my sense of, and which means they have bought something additional to their HR environment, right? Like, because we track the numbers. So I think the answer is that you can do analytics. You can do analytics with your core HR in a spreadsheet. We know that because that's where the market started. Yeah. But whether or not that has level of confidence, or the level of usability, or the level of ability to sort of expand that out to the audiences that need to see it, right? Like, those are all the things that you have to think about, not whether or not it will help you do the job better, but whether or not it will help you tell the story better. And I think that's where we start to see the need for the analytics tools really come about, because the data is the data, and many of the HRIS and platform tools have the data in it. And sometimes you can pull that out and put it into some other tool that will allow you to sort of crunch it. But the same problem I have with the survey is the same problem every internal company has with their environment. I have a ton of data. I'm constantly saying, okay, pull this. Let me see. Like, we can tell you that those organizations in top 5 industries that utilize analytics tools are business, consulting, finance, healthcare, retail, and high tech. The least likely to use analytics tools is education and government, right? Which kind of is sad and scary, but not surprising from a maturity perspective, right? Right. I struggle every day. My biggest thing that I know that I fall down on, and my that I'm always working on, is how to represent that data back to the industry in a way that they can use it, right? That's the thing that I know every day that I am falling down in a way that just drives me nuts, because I have all this data and the community needs it. And I try and get it out there in different ways that people can leverage it. And I know that it's just never good enough. And I think that's the piece that those analytics tools, if they're the right ones, are doing the really good job at, which is helping you make it more usable by the company, because no data is valuable if it's sitting inside of a box.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't want to start an argument with you, but I think you're doing a fabulous job. Actually, I know you're doing a fabulous job, and I know there are hundreds, if not, thousands of people who believe that you are. So keep doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
I will build off that, what you said, the sentiment, in that our ability to tell stories visually and through a coherent, confidence-inspiring narrative still has a long way to go. And the idea that analytics ends with a scatter plot and an R squared is not appropriate. And on the other side of the coin, just putting a number out there, without context, and, doing the underlying analytics to support the story of that number is it could be irresponsible and misleading as well. So, finding that right, okay, this is the work this is the means in which is really going to resonate with my internal customer, my audience, and making sure you're bridging that gap, I think is critically important. And yeah, technology can certainly help with that. And, it's accelerated the process immeasurably over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So certainly celebrate that. So I know we have coming up on time. I do have a couple more questions. One is really core. So I mentioned it earlier. The survey, it takes some work. And so why do it? If I'm going to do it, why?
So we actually ask, one of our last questions is, why did you take the survey? And the reason I asked that is because when I first joined back in the day when it was here, Cedar, now it's Sapient Insights, but I couldn't understand why people were taking the survey, because I come from an industry where no more than 36 questions, no more than 20 minutes for them to respond to the survey, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, why are people doing this? And so I think there's really the top 5 things that we get back. The people tell us why they're taking it. One is, hey, I get the report. It's valuable, right? And I will tell you that as an organization, we always try and give out more to the community as a whole, but we are trying to figure out ways to say, hey, if you're going to spend that 2 hours, let's make it more valuable for you. So we are putting more in that one report that goes to the person who takes it than we are in the market as a whole. So that's something to be aware of. Second is that, we do try and give you back right after you take it a response to all your answers and your own little sort of mini benchmark. And we find people find that valuable if they're just trying to make a business case on that day and just get a sense of where their current environment stands, because we know a lot of organizations are constantly in the process of reevaluating their environment. And sometimes you just need to see it all on one sheet to know what it is. And so we get a lot of people who say, look, that printout of everything that I answered, I then take to the department that's we're talking about doing a shift or a transformation, and that becomes the tool that we use for our business development case. And so we know people use it that way. The other 2 ways probably I think are a little bit more altruistic. We get a lot of people say they take it just because they think they want their voice heard about a particular vendor or a particular space, or that they feel that it's just important for the community to have this data, and there's no one else who does it year over year and make sure that it gets out there. So we hear that a lot from people who take it. And I think that to me is, as all of us get in through our career, it's really easy to sort of just move on and say, well, it's time to retire, and sometimes that beach looks really good, I will tell you. But there's a lot of people I think who are trying to figure out ways to give back. And it's really hard to say that I can, spend hours and hours, volunteering at IRM or hours and hours doing anything. But I can spend 2 hours filling out a survey and knowing that will help. I've made some mistakes or I've made some great decisions in the selections I've made. Someone else could learn from that. So those are the reasons that people tell us that they respond.
Well, that's great perspective, and it inspires me, and I imagine going to be many others to take it over these next 2 weeks. So that's the last question, actually. Where can they learn about the survey, and what's the date?
So it will be open till July 15th. So we've got literally like 7 days, and I didn't say it, but it might be open up a day or so after. Kim sometimes, will extend if you let her know that you are going to take it. So if you're having a hard time meeting that deadline, reach out to us. Just let us know. Really, the most important thing to find, it's pretty easy. Just go to our website, www.sapientinsights.com. And right on the front page, it has take the survey. Click on it. It'll take you right to take in the survey. If you go to the front section, you'll be able to pick the areas that you want to focus on most. If you only have 15 minutes, take it, get to that section and pick 2 sections, and that will help us, right? If you just want to answer about the analytics tools, or if you just want to answer about one area, if you want to get a bigger benchmark for yourself or a bigger analysis back, it's better to take the whole survey. So I do tell people that. I'm like, you get back what you put into it from those mini benchmarks that we give. Yeah, it's, and to your audience who does take it, because I know your audience a lot. I love people when they say my title is, head of people analytics, or my title is people and practices, right? Because you answer the survey so well. You're so descriptive about what works and doesn't work. Whether that data is actually coming out of it the way you want to. So thank you to your audience.
Absolutely. And yeah, well, thank you to you and your team for doing what you do. It's been a joy to learn with you and from you over the years. And I look forward to seeing you at the end of September in person, finally, in Las Vegas for HR Tech.
Exactly. At HR Tech. If anybody's going to be there, stop by. Al's going to have some sessions. I'll have sessions.
Yeah.
Where can we find you? Is there a place everybody's meeting up, or are we going to do drinks some night somewhere? Or?
We're going to have to figure that out.
We'll have to let the audience know. There will have to be some place where we can all get together, because we would like to see everybody. It's been too long. So.
It has. Well, again, Stacey, super appreciate you. Thank you for sharing your insights and ideas and doing what you do. And we'll see you before too long now.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.